money isn't everything. I think I heard that time and time again, and I still do to date. Or at least up until a couple of years ago, I probably heard it quite a lot until I really wrapped my head around money and why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I want to make money. And I was able to explain that. And then I didn't hear money isn't everything as much because I had a real reason why I was going after the money. And I understood why I was going after it.
You're listening to Hustle Culture, a podcast that shows you how to take your hustle to the next level. I'm Jordan Glickman, a 24-year-old homeless entrepreneur who's constantly looking for a better way. Whether it be maximizing work-life balance while trying to reach my first 7 figures, or taking advantage of credit card points and biohacking my way to optimal health and efficiency, I'm all about it. Regardless if you're an entrepreneur or not, I invite you to join me in my journey of constant self-development. Join me and my guest as we deliver real value and actionable steps to embrace and make the most out of your hustle.
Welcome back to another episode of Hustle Culture, a podcast about money. And rather, we have talked about money quite a bit on this podcast overall. If you've listened to most of the episodes, it normally gets brought up at some point or another. And I think that there's clear reasons for that. Our lives revolve around it in one way or another, and a lot more than we probably think about. The type of food choices that we make every day, the places that we live, the amount of gas that we put in our car each day, the amount that we decide to spend at the restaurant, whatever it may be. It all kind of ends up revolving around money and how much you have of it or how much you are making of it. It all comes down to how you think about money, what you think of money, how you use money, how you get your own money. And it's all imperative to really making you who you are as a person, I think. I think that it's a big part of it, whether we like to think that or not. And I think it's also a big part of getting you to where you want to be. Again, it's all about how you view money and what you think of it. But I think that these are really important, critical things that, at least in my life, I think that it makes you who you are from the aspect of what you're capable of. Not necessarily that you're a higher status or something like that, but maybe it makes you greedier. Maybe it makes you more giving. Maybe it makes you more selfish. Not necessarily a good or bad thing that it correlates with an amount, but I think that it does have an impact on your personality, and I think it has an impact on where you're going to go in life. And again, not always the correlation that you may think it is. I just think that it has an impact on these things. So I want to ask 6 questions, and I'm going to ask them here in a moment, and I want you to think about them. And I'm going to try to give time in the podcast for you to think about it with a completely blank pause. So literally take a pause in the podcast after I ask each question and try to write them down, even if it's on your notes or if you're, cleaning your room and you're listening to the podcast. Take time to just think about it. If you don't write it down, okay, but take time to think about it and really think of what that answer is, because I'm going to go over what my answers are to these to open up at least the other side of it and what do I think my answers are to it, to kind of shed light as, again, my own perspective. But I think that you will have your own perspective, and I think it's going to be important for you to try to understand what it might be as the answers to these questions before I share mine. I do think, and I want to give credit, that I think I got this from a Tony Robbins exercise, or maybe it was part of an exercise or something like that about a year ago. So I just actually found these answers in my notes on my iPhone today, and I thought that it would make for a good value-driven podcast. So here goes nothing, and I think that it will have some value for some people. So here are the 6 questions. The first one is fill in the blank. Money is. So you're going to fill in the blank after the 2 words, money is, and decide a couple examples, not necessarily just one. What is money? Money is blank. Go ahead, pause the episode, and think about it for a minute. For the second one, I want you to list pains that come from not having financial abundance. I want you to list down what hurts around you, what suffers by not having the financial abundance that you need. What is it that would make your life better? What is it that you wouldn't have to stress about? What kind of pains come from not having the amount of money that you seek? So financial abundance being more than just making enough to get by, but an abundance of money. List the pains down that come from not having financial abundance. Go ahead, take a couple seconds. For the third one, I want you to think of 3 to 5 words, singular words, that associate to money. What kind of words do you associate with money specifically? Go ahead and take a few seconds. For the fourth one, I want you to think back and way back, especially for some of us. Things that you heard about money, both explicitly and implicitly. Just phrases that you remember hearing as a child from your mom, from your dad, from your parents, from whomever it may be around you. What phrases do you remember about money? How did you grow up? What was money for you? And what kind of phrases do you remember from those times? You're going to ultimately relate this back to how it might affect you now. For the fifth one, how would life be greater and better if you had an unlimited amount of money? And for the very last one, I want you to try to attach a new belief to the limiting belief that you may have from money. And this relates back to the fourth one. So if you had a phrase growing up, such as, let's say, money doesn't grow on trees, then you would attach a belief to that limiting belief. And again, I'm trying my best not to give away too many good examples, but before you create your own. But I think this one's a little bit harder to understand. So for myself, I'll kind of reveal this 6-1 for me. But if money doesn't grow on trees, so attaching a new belief to the limiting belief. So money doesn't grow on trees is the phrase that I used to have that I remember from growing up. And I would now add a new belief to it that money doesn't grow on trees. It grows the new ideas that I pursue every day. So it should attach a new type of belief to that limiting belief or that limiting phrase that you remember from the fourth one. So hopefully you've taken a little bit of time to pause after each of these questions and at least really think about it, hopefully write it down so you can come back to these answers and maybe even build on them after I give some of mine as examples. But I think by going through this exercise and opening up my perspective on these answers, and then you can add on to yours, you're going to be able to create a much clearer picture on how money affects you in your daily life and your future and from your past, and how your past is affecting your future or your present. So let's jump into each one of these. So for me, money is, and I guess you probably don't have to grammatically fit this exactly, but for me, money is, it creates opportunities. So money creates opportunities for me. For me, money is pleasurable and positive. And the third one that I had was money is, eliminates family sickness. So I see money from a few different perspectives, more than just money is monetary, money is Lamborghini, money is big house. I see it as being able to eliminate family sicknesses, being able to create opportunities for myself and for others. And I see it as something that's totally positive and it's very pleasurable as well. So that's what I think money is. And again, I'm sure that these beliefs change over time. And in fact, all of these answers were from about a year ago. So they've probably changed to date. But after reading through them, they are quite still similar. So let's move on to the next one. List pains that come from not having financial abundance. So these pains, before I jump into my answers, they should have made it compelling enough for you to want these wants. So for example, pains from not having financial abundance would not be, I don't have a Lamborghini. It would be more along the lines of, I don't have enough food every month to stay healthy. So it would need to be something and an answer that is compelling enough to want having financial abundance. These are the things that are ultimately going to drive you in your journey. initially and long term, depending on the answers. So if the answers that I have is that I wanted enough, or the pains that I have from not having financial abundance would be I don't get to travel enough. And for me, that's experiences. That's one of the greatest things that I think I can spend money on personally. From not being able to afford the different types of foods that I want. And I'm not talking about filet mignon every day, but just healthier foods, specifically, maybe more fresh foods or whatever it may be. But I think food is one of those driving factors that sometimes I tend to skip out on, even if I can actually afford it. I think having that financial abundance gives me that association in my mind that I can totally have this. I don't need to worry about spending $20 extra. I can afford it without question. I think stress is arguably one. I think in certain ways having more money can lead to more stress, but I also think that in other ways it could lead to less stress. And I think that's probably up for an entire podcast to be talked about. So I don't think that in any way stress completely goes away by having financial abundance, but I think certain stressors can go away. And again, I'm sure that new ones will present themselves. I think bills is another one. So having to think about how much you're spending on electricity every month, how long you run the AC, or things like that. Very small things. These were things that I was thinking about a year ago, probably. And it does line up with about the rough timeline of how much I was making then versus what I'm doing now. And so I think bills is another one. And I think also charity is another one. I personally know that I find a lot of fulfillment by giving back to people or giving to people, whether it's an opportunity or money or time. I know I get a lot out of that. And I think having financial abundance will enable that a lot more. And I think another one for the future, and depending on which phase of your life you're in, is kids. If you have kids, I think that having financial abundance is probably something you would want to have to an extent so that you can give them the best life that you possibly can. And again, I think that money, in my opinion, is an enabler for that. It's a tool for that. So for the third one, singular words that associate to money. And this is partially how you view money, right? So my answers here were freedom, safety, security, giving, and lifestyle. And you can see a lot of these answers so far, just in the first three questions, start to relate to each other a lot. And it really shows you what you think about money, why you're going after it, if you are going after it in any way, shape, or form. So for me, freedom is the freedom of my time, the freedom of a job, the freedom of so many different things. Safety in terms of being able to maybe live in a safe place, being able to know that my family is safe, knowing that I'm able to do safe things. Same thing with security. Giving being another one. So money is something that enables you again, and so enables you to give to others, whether it's charity or whatever it may be. Jobs, giving jobs to other people. So the more money I make now, the more jobs I actually end up giving. And the last one is lifestyle. So again, not necessarily Lamborghinis and stuff like that, but I think that the singular word of lifestyle for me is experiences, and maybe that's a better word to put there now. But lifestyle/experiences is, again, I think something that I highly associate is if I have a lot of money, one of the things I really want to do is create more experiences, whether it's going on a trip with friends to go snowboarding or it's going to a private island for a weekend. I think that it's an association that I have from the singular word. So for the fourth one, what are things that you heard about money explicitly or implicitly, or phrases that you remember hearing from when you were younger? So a few of them from me, and I think that some people will have some aligned, but I know that a lot of people will have totally different answers here. And that's what I think is so interesting, because I've talked to one or two people about this, and they have totally different answers. So try to compare yours to mine and see how differently we potentially grew up, or maybe very similarly. So one of the first things is money isn't everything. I think I heard that time and time again, and I still do to date, or at least up until a couple of years ago. I probably heard it quite a lot until I really wrapped my head around money and why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I want to make money, and I was able to explain that. And then I didn't hear money isn't everything as much because I had a real reason why I was going after the money. and I understood why I was going after it. I think another thing is that there's no time to enjoy it. I heard that, I cannot remember from who now, but that there's no time to enjoy the money that you're making. So if you work too hard and you work too long, there's no time to enjoy that. I think I do know who I heard that from. And I think that that's also very realistic as well. Because when you work 60 to 80 hours a week and that's all you do, you will not have time to enjoy the money you are making. Another one that I had mentioned previously is money doesn't grow on trees. So I think that that might be something that a lot of people have heard before, or maybe over and over, like myself. Another thing I heard as a phrase was, we cannot afford it. Now, I grew up, I think, middle class. We didn't grow up poor. We didn't grow up, rich and wealthy. Had a good life. Parents put me through school entirely and everything, and definitely brought me up very well, and they make well for themselves. But I do remember hearing things of, we cannot afford this or that, and it wasn't necessarily very expensive things, and it may have just been my parents' way of saying, we're not going to pay for that for you, even if they could technically afford it. It just wasn't a smart decision for them to do such. And so the other one, which being quite similar, is that it costs too much. And again, same exact kind of scenario there, as we can't afford it. Not necessarily probably can't afford it, but just not really a good use of our money in the position that we're in compared to maybe other families, for example. So for the very second to last one, I guess technically, the fifth one, how life would be greater and better if you had unlimited money. And I think that this answer, before I answer it, and you think about what your answer was, I think this is so important, and it's ever changing, but it can bring a real perspective to your purpose and your why you're doing what you're doing, or why you're working your job, or why you're starting the business that you're starting, or why you're running the business you're running. I think that if you really answer this correctly and do your best to do it, it's going to open up and shed light on a lot, which is why I think that writing these answers down and reflecting on them is so important. So my answer as to what I would do if I had an unlimited amount of money, I know that I would travel more. I would create a lot more experiences. I would spend a lot more time traveling and creating experiences with others that I could create as memories. I'd probably work a little bit smarter, so I'd work less hours. And, I still enjoy what I do, and I still love working. It's who I am, and it's who I always will be. But I think that I would work a little bit smarter, and it would work a little bit more high level and not so much in the nitty gritty, which I feel like I have to do now. And I think, again, that's also up for a longer podcast in terms of, do you have to work super long hours to get on your feet as an entrepreneur or not? But that's besides the point. I would focus on cultivating more relationships, so I'd probably put more effort into relationships, whether it's close significant others or it's friends or it's family. I think I would put more time into that as well. And the reason I don't now is because my biggest personal focus is my business and what is going to allow me to hopefully live a very, comfortable life in the far future as well too, for a much longer period of time. So putting in the grind and the hustle, if you will, now, so that the last, 40 or 60 or 80 years of my own, and maybe not 80, so 40 to 70 years, are very, very comfortable years as well. I would probably also eat finer foods, and again, not necessarily filet mignons or anything like that every night, but I think a lot more fresh vegetables or whatever it may be. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but also with unlimited money, you could have a personal chef, personal maid. And while these are more things to look after and could create more stress, as again, that is also probably up for another entire podcast, as having more things and more money can lead to more stress, I think that having the unlimited amount of money would enable you to, again, do these things. And so I think eating better and eating fresher and nicer things that I know are probably technically better for your mental health, your physical health, etc., is something I would put more effort into. Not by any means do I eat fast food every single day, or do I eat terrible at home. Again, I come with a big fitness background, and if you're listening to this podcast or you know anything about me, I have a decent fitness background, so it is something that I'm conscious of already, but I think there's always room for improvement, and it's also an enjoyment. I think eating fresh and healthy, really nice foods is also something that is enjoyable, but it's typically more expensive. I would probably take care of myself more. So whether it's more massages or manicures or head haircuts or whatever it may be that I don't do now as often or as often as I should, I would probably do that. And the last one is also give more. So I think right now in my current phase of life, I'm working, and I'm saving, or I'm reinvesting, but I'm not giving as much. And I think that again becomes a part of just my journey. In the beginning part, I need to reinvest, I need to save. And so I think with unlimited money, giving more, whether it is jobs, it's opportunities, it's time, I think would be a lot more realistic potentially. And so the very last one, which I've already technically mentioned, but I'll do it again very quickly and briefly, is to attach a new belief to the limiting belief. And so if you'll remember from the fourth question, my question was that, or my answer was that money doesn't grow on trees. And so attaching a new belief to the limiting belief would be that it grows the new ideas that I pursue every day. And so that is pretty much the end of this podcast, more or less. I hope that these questions have opened up how, if you ask them to yourself and you give the right and truthful answers of what you think about them, it can really show you why you're doing what you're doing, why you're pursuing it, why maybe what you're doing is maybe not the most efficient and effective, or how you can stay on track for these certain things, to have it as a nice reminder for what it is that you want to do and keep working towards. So I hope this was valuable to somebody. Again, it was something I found in my notes. I thought it would be valuable. I know that it had a small impact on me and just having a better perspective on money in general. And so again, I hope this is helpful. I hope you took value away from this. And I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.
Hey there, hustlers. That's this week's episode of the Hustle Culture Podcast. Thank you again for listening, and don't forget to join us next week for another episode. If you're able to take away any bit of value from this episode and you want to support the channel, there are 3 things that you could do that would massively support me and the team that make all of this possible. The first one is to leave a review wherever you're listening to this podcast at. The second one would be to share it with a friend. And the third one would be to head over to jordanglickman.com, go to the resource tab, and I've compiled all of the best resources and tools that I use, from amassing as many credit card points as I have to structuring my day. I know it will be a great resource to most people listening. That's all for me today, and thank you again for tuning in to Hustle Culture.